My sister hired investigators to expose me. They returned in handcuffs and she screamed. What happens when the person trying to destroy your life accidentally exposes their own? This is a story about truth, betrayal, and the moment a carefully built lie collapsed in front of everyone who mattered. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, you need to hear how this ended. Make sure you're subscribed because this story unfolds in ways you will not see coming. My name is Anya. I'm 42 years old, and what I'm about to tell you isn't a fictional thriller. It's my real life. Let me take you back to the night it all came to a head. The air in the hotel ballroom was thick with perfume and pretension. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter was a little too loud, and every smile was a performance. This was my sister Celia's world, her annual charity gala, the event where she shined brightest. And I was there because, for once, our mother had begged me to show up. For the family, she had said. So I went, wearing a dress that felt like a costume, standing in a room where I had always felt like a ghost. I was nursing a sparkling water near a potted fern, already calculating how soon I could politely leave when I felt it. A shift. It wasn't a sound, it was a current. A sudden, silent tension that made the hairs on my arm stand up. I looked across the room and saw them. 3 people, walking in, not through the main entrance, but from a side door near the kitchens. 2 men and a woman. They wore suits, but they weren't guests. Their posture was all wrong. Too straight, too alert, their eyes scanning the crowd with a purpose that had nothing to do with canapes or small talk. My stomach dropped. It was a physical sensation, a cold knot forming deep inside. I didn't know who they were, but every instinct screamed that they were here for me. For months, I had this creeping feeling of being watched. Unexplained delays on business licenses, a bank asking for redundant verification. My assistant mentioned a man who'd come by the office asking vague questions about company structure. I'd chalked it up to bureaucracy, to bad luck, but standing there watching those 3 figures move through my sister's perfect party, the pieces clicked into a terrifying picture. This was no accident. Celia was at the podium now, her smile luminous under the spotlight. She was thanking donors, praising the foundation's work, her voice a smooth, practiced instrument. She looked radiant, confident. Then her eyes flicked to me, just for a second. And in that glance, I didn't see my sister. I saw a predator who'd cornered its prey. It was a look of pure, chilling anticipation. She knew they were here. She'd been waiting for this. The investigators, because that's clearly what they were, didn't come toward me. They stationed themselves near the back, arms crossed, waiting. They were letting the scene play out, letting Celia have the stage. This was her production, and I was the unsuspecting actor in her drama. The lead investigator, a woman with a severe blonde bun, gave a slight, professional nod. This was their cue. They began to walk forward, their shoes silent on the plush carpet. The crowd parted for them. All eyes were on me. I could see the script so clearly now. The concerned sister, exposing the fraudulent sibling, saving the family honor. She'd win praise for her courage. I'd be ruined. The female investigator reached me first. She didn't smile. "Anya Voss?" "Yes," I said, my own voice surprising me with its steadiness. "We need you to come with us. We have questions regarding the financial practices of Voss Strategic Security." It was happening exactly as Celia had planned. I saw my mother bring a hand to her mouth. My father stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "Now wait just a minute," he began. But then the investigator did something unexpected. She didn't reach for me. She turned, just slightly, toward her 2 colleagues, and one of the men gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. His attention wasn't on me at all. He was looking at his phone, his expression grim. He muttered something to the woman, then shifted his stance, blocking the path back to the door. The dynamic changed in a heartbeat. The professional detachment vanished, replaced with a sharper, more urgent energy. The woman with the bun turned back to the room, but she didn't address me. Her voice, louder now, cut through the tension. "Celia Voss?" From the podium, Celia's perfect smile faltered. "Yes, how can I help you?" Her tone was sweet, helpful, the generous hostess. "You are the director of the Crestwood Foundation, correct?" "I am." A flicker of confusion in her eyes. She glanced at me, as if I might explain this deviation from her script. The investigator pulled a folded document from her inner jacket pocket. "We are with the State Financial Crimes Unit. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of misappropriation of charitable funds, falsification of regulatory documents, and wire fraud." You could have heard a pin drop. Then a collective, sharp intake of breath. Celia blinked. "What?" "No, there's a mistake. You're here for her." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "The warrant is for you, Miss Voss. The inquiry into your sister's business was initiated at your request. During that process, irregularities were flagged in your own foundation's financial audits. A deeper examination was ordered. The evidence is substantial." One of the male investigators stepped forward. In his hands were a pair of slender metal handcuffs. They caught the light from the chandelier. That's when my sister screamed. It wasn't a loud, dramatic wail. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure, undiluted terror. The sound of a world imploding. It ripped through the silent ballroom, horrifying and real. The investigators moved quickly. They guided her hands behind her back. The metallic click of the cuffs locking was deafening in the quiet room. As they led her past me, her head down, her beautiful gown suddenly looking like a ridiculous costume, she looked up. Our eyes met. The hatred there was so potent it was like a physical force. But beneath it, swimming in tears, was a shocking, undeniable truth. Sheer, utter shock. She had never seen this coming. She had been so focused on exposing me, she left her own flank completely unprotected. They took her out the same side door they'd entered. The party was over. The aftermath was chaos. Guests murmured, hurried for the exits. My parents were frozen, two statues of disbelief. I just stood there, the eye of a storm I hadn't created. The truth washed over me, cold and clear. Her investigators, hired to dig up dirt on me, had found nothing. My business was clean. But their thoroughness, their access, their very presence, it had triggered a red flag somewhere in the system. A routine cross-check had turned its gaze on the person who'd filed the inquiry. It had looked at the Crestwood Foundation's books, and it had found a house of cards. I walked out of that ballroom alone, the weight of my sister's scream still hanging in the air. But to understand how we got here, to that moment of public ruin, you have to understand the silence that came before it. You have to go back to the beginning, to the quiet girl in the shadow of the golden child. That's where the real story starts. I grew up in the quiet, persistent shadow of my sister's son. Celia was 2 years older, and from the moment I was aware of anything, I was aware of her brilliance. It wasn't just that she was pretty, or smart, or charismatic, though she was all those things. It was that she possessed a kind of gravitational pull. Family gatherings, school events, even just dinner at home. The room naturally oriented itself toward her. My parents, Richard and Elaine, orbited her with a pride that was both their joy and their full-time occupation. And me? I was the quiet satellite, stable, reliable, out on the edge of the picture. My father was a structural engineer. He believed in things he could measure, calculate, and predict. He loved Celia's achievements because they were tangible. Student council president, lead in the school play, acceptance to a prestigious liberal arts college. They were data points on a chart that trended ever upward. My mother was the emotional architect. She nurtured Celia's social grace, her poise, her ability to work a room. Together, they built a pedestal, and Celia was born to stand on it. I didn't fit on a pedestal. My mind didn't work in grand, visible gestures. It worked in layers, in systems, in silent connections. While Celia was running for office, I was in the school library, teaching myself basic coding from a discarded textbook. I found a strange peace in the logic of it, in the clean cause and effect of a well-written program. When I proudly showed my parents a simple animation I'd made, a starfield scrolling across a black screen, my father patted my shoulder. "That's very creative, honey, but maybe you could help your sister with her campaign website. Put those skills to practical use." It was never malicious. It was a constant, gentle redirecting of my energy toward her light. At family dinners, the conversation was a script I knew by heart. "Celia, tell us about the donor meeting." "Celia, the article in the paper was wonderful." Then the pivot to me. "And Anya, how are your computer projects?" It was always a question, never a statement. My world was an uncertain, fuzzy place to them. Their love wasn't absent, but it was filtered through a lens of mild concern, as if my path was a narrow, overgrown trail they couldn't quite see down. The fracture, the real one, happened the summer I turned 23. I was finishing my master's in cybersecurity. Celia had just launched the Crestwood Foundation, using a significant inheritance from our grandmother as seed money. The dinner was at our parents' house, a celebratory send-off for her new venture. The air was thick with triumph. Celia held court, explaining her vision for community outreach. My parents listened, rapt. Then, my dad turned to me. "And you, Anya, what's the long-term plan after graduation? The tech field can be so volatile." Before I could answer, Celia smiled, that warm, inclusive smile that made everyone feel like they were part of her plan. "You know, I've been thinking, we're going to need a really robust, secure database for donor information, something beyond the basic stuff. Anya, you could come on board, get the foundation's digital infrastructure set up. It would be a stable position, and you'd be part of something meaningful." My mother's face lit up. "Oh, that's a wonderful idea. Sisters working together, it's perfect." They all looked at me, waiting for my grateful acceptance. The silence stretched. In that moment, I saw my entire future with terrifying clarity. It was a supporting role in Celia's story. My expertise would become a footnote in her legacy. I would spend my life maintaining the system that upheld her image. The weight of a lifetime of gentle redirects settled on my chest. I set my fork down. The sound was too loud in the quiet room. "No," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "Thank you, but no. I'm starting my own company." The shock on their faces was almost comical. It wasn't anger, it was pure, uncomprehending surprise, like a lamp had just spoken. "Your own what?" my father asked, blinking. "A cybersecurity firm, Voss Strategic Security." Celia's smile didn't falter, but it tightened at the corners. "Anya, that's a huge risk. The market is saturated, and the startup costs. Do you have any idea what you're doing?" That was the question, wasn't it? The core of it all. Did I have any idea what I was doing? In their eyes, probably not, because my idea of doing didn't look like theirs. I have a business plan, which is true. I'd been writing it in secret for months. I have my first client lined up. Also true, a professor who believed in me. My mother reached out, touching my hand. "We just worry, sweetheart. We want you to be secure." I looked at her, then at my father.
Then it's Celia, whose expression had shifted from surprised to something more analytical, more assessing. I know, I said, but my security can't be tied to Celia's foundation. I left soon after. The car ride home to my tiny apartment was a blur. My hands trembled on the wheel. I had just declared independence from the only narrative my family understood. I felt exhilarated and utterly, terrifyingly alone. The next 5 years were a grind of pure focus. I worked 80-hour weeks. I ate countless meals at my desk. My office was my living room. I didn't go to family holidays blaming work deadlines. The distance wasn't just geographical, it was a necessary cocoon. Every time I spoke to my parents, their questions were subtly pointed. "How's the company?" my dad would ask, the pause speaking volumes. Celia's foundation, meanwhile, was featured in society magazines. She was a young philanthropist, a community beacon. The contrast was a chasm. I built Voss Strategic Security on one principle: airtight integrity. In my world, trust wasn't about charm, it was about demonstrable results. We protected small businesses from data breaches, helped nonprofits secure their donor files. Our reputation grew slowly by word of mouth in a world that didn't make the society pages. I hired a small team, brilliant, quiet people like me. We spoke the language of firewalls and encryption, not fundraising galas. I thought I'd built a wall between my life and theirs. I was wrong. I'd just built a dam, and the pressure was building on the other side. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. My COO, Leo, a man with the calm demeanor of a monk and the mind of a chess grandmaster, walked into my office without knocking. That alone was a red flag. "You've got a minute?" he asked, closing the door. "Always. What's up?" He placed a single sheet of paper on my desk. It was a log printed from our own internal monitoring system. It showed a series of external queries about Voss strategic security, corporate registration details, my professional licensing history, even the property records for my office building. The queries weren't illegal. They were the kind of thing a cautious investor or a potential partner might do. But the pattern was off. "See the source IDs?" Leo pointed. "These all originate from the same third-party background check firm. High-end, expensive, not the kind a standard investor uses for preliminary screening. This is a deep, structured due diligence, the kind you do when you're looking for something specific." I felt a chill. "Who hired them?" "That's the thing," Leo said, his voice low. "The firm is a shield, but I called in a favor from an old contact in banking compliance. He did some indirect tracing. The payment for these inquiries, it's routed through a discretionary fund." He met my eyes. "A fund attached to the Crestwood Foundation." The room seemed to tilt. I heard the clink of crystal glasses, saw Celia's smile from the podium. It wasn't a memory, it was a premonition. "She's having me investigated," I said, the words tasting like ash. "It looks that way," Leo said quietly. "They won't find anything, Anya. We're clean. You know we're clean." I did know, but that wasn't the point. The point was the intention. The point was that my sister was spending foundation money, grandmother's money, to hire professionals to dig into my life, to find a weakness, a scandal, a flaw she could use against me. "What do you want to do?" Leo asked. I stared at the log, at the cold data of my sister's betrayal. The old hurt, the quiet girl in the shadow, rose up, but it was quickly burned away by a colder, sharper fire. This wasn't childhood rivalry anymore. This was a declared war. "We do nothing," I said finally. Leo raised an eyebrow. We let them look. We make sure everything is exactly where it should be, more transparent than glass. But Leo, I want you to do something else. Don't block their inquiries. Don't alert them. Just mirror the activity. Mirror it? Flag every single query that comes from that firm. Document it. And then, using entirely legal public channels, I want you to trace the financial flow of the Crestwood Foundation. Not to interfere, just to observe. If she's using their funds for this, what else is she using them for? A slow understanding dawned on Leo's face. He wasn't a man of drama, but he believed in justice, in systemic integrity. What my sister was doing offended him on a professional level. You think there's more?
I think a person who uses a charity as a weapon, I said, my voice barely a whisper, probably doesn't respect its boundaries anywhere else. He nodded once, a soldier accepting a mission. I'll set up a passive watch. It'll take some time. We have time, I said. But even as I said it, I felt the clock ticking. The gala was in 6 weeks. I'd received the embossed invitation. It was sitting on my kitchen counter, like a ticking bomb. I didn't know what Celia planned to do with whatever her investigators found, or didn't find, but I knew the stage she'd chosen, and for the first time in my life, I knew I couldn't stay in the wings. The quiet satellite was about to change its orbit. The dam was about to break, and I was going to find out if I'd built my life on higher ground, or if I would drown in the flood she was trying to create. The strange part? I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready, and she had no idea what was coming. The next few weeks were a study in quiet tension. I went through the motions of my life, client meetings, security audits, team briefings, but underneath it all was a low, constant hum, like a warning alarm only I could hear. Leo worked silently in the background. He'd give me updates, not with words, but with a look, a slight nod. The mirroring operation was in place. We were watching the watchers. Meanwhile, the inquiries into my company intensified, but they always stayed just on the right side of intrusive. They were professional, thorough, and utterly fruitless. I almost wanted to call Celia and tell her she was wasting her foundation's money. Almost. But the game was in motion now, and revealing I knew would only force her to change tactics. The invitation to the gala became a focal point. My mother called, her voice strained with a hope that felt like a plea. It would mean so much to your father and me, Anya. The whole family will be there. It's a big night for Celia. She's receiving a community leadership award. There was a pause. She'd love it if you were there. I almost laughed. She wouldn't love it. She'd need it. I was the final prop in her production, the final confirmation of her narrative, the wayward sister graciously welcomed back into the fold, perhaps publicly forgiven for my mysterious transgressions. My absence would be a question mark. My presence was a necessity for her script. I'll be there, Mom, I said, my voice flat. The silence on the other end was surprised, then relieved. Oh, honey, that's wonderful. I'll have them add your place card at the family table. After I hung up, I sat in the dark of my office for a long time. I wasn't going for them. I wasn't even going for her. I was going for me, for the girl who'd been told her world was a hobby, for the woman who'd built something real in the silence they'd left her in. I was going to stand in that room, in the heart of her kingdom, and I was going to be unbreakable. Let her try her reveal. The truth was my armor. The night of the gala arrived. I wore a simple black sheath dress. No jewelry. I wanted to look like what I was. A fact. A statement. Not a participant in their glittering world. Walking into that ballroom was like stepping into a living organism made of light and sound and ambition. I saw old family friends, society faces I recognized from magazines, and there, at the center of it all, was my family. My father stood tall, proud, beaming. My mother flitted nervously, adjusting a centerpiece. And Celia. She was radiant. She wore a gown the color of champagne, and she moved through the crowd like a queen, bestowing smiles, touching arms, laughing at just the right moments. She was at the peak of everything she'd ever wanted. She saw me. Our eyes met across the crowded room. Her smile didn't waver, but it changed. It became sharper, more deliberate. It was a hunter's smile. She gave me a small, regal nod. I simply looked back, my face neutral. I found my place at the family table. The air there was different, stiff, formal. My father clapped me on the back. "Glad you could make it, kiddo." My mother kissed my cheek, her perfume overwhelming. "You look lovely, dear." The words were correct, but they hung in the air, empty. Celia floated over just as dinner was served. "Anya, I'm so glad you came. I know how busy you must be with your little company." "It's keeping me occupied," I said, taking a sip of water. "I'm sure it is." She leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially, though it was still loud enough for our parents to hear. "You know, I've been hearing such interesting things lately about the cybersecurity field. So many scandals, data leaks, fraud. It must be hard to build trust." The hook was set. She was beginning the narrative. "Trust is earned with transparency," I said, meeting her gaze. "It's the foundation of any enterprise. Don't you agree?" For a fraction of a second, her mask slipped, a flicker of irritation. She recovered instantly. "Absolutely. Transparency is everything." She patted my arm before gliding away to another table. Dinner was a blur of speeches from local dignitaries, each one praising Celia's vision, her compassion, her integrity. The word integrity was used so many times it began to lose all meaning. With each accolade, the air in the room grew thicker, more charged. The performance was building to its climax. Finally, the MC called her up for her award. She ascended the steps to the podium, a vision of perfect success. She gave a humble, moving speech about service, about family, about the responsibility of privilege. She was magnificent. And then she paused. She looked out at the audience, her expression turning pained, courageous. "But true leadership," she said, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone, "also means having the courage to face hard truths, even within our own families." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. My parents stiffened. This was the deviation from the planned script. "We are only as strong as our weakest link," she continued, her eyes now finding me, pinning me to my seat. "And sometimes, in our desire to support those we love, we can enable paths that lead away from the values we hold dear. I speak tonight from a place of love, but also from a place of duty." This was it. The public intervention. The sister savior. She was going to announce her concerns about my business, couched in love, legitimized by the independent investigation she'd commissioned. She would force a choice upon everyone in this room: stand with her, the pillar of the community, or stand with me, the question mark. She opened her mouth to deliver the final damning line, and that's when the side door opened. I've already described them to you. The three figures, the severe blonde bun, the purposeful walk, the way the energy in the room snapped and twisted away from Celia and toward them. The moment their target became clear, it was like the entire world slowed down. I watched Celia's face. I saw the confusion as they didn't approach me. I saw the dawning horror as the female investigator said her name. I saw the utter, earth-shattering disbelief as the charges were read. Her mind couldn't process it. This was not the plot twist she had written. When the male investigator produced the handcuffs, her composure didn't just crack, it exploded. That scream. It wasn't human. It was the sound of a universe collapsing in on itself, of a lifetime of carefully constructed reality shattering into a million unrecognizable pieces. The click of the cuffs was the period at the end of her sentence. As they led her past me, our eyes met for the last time that night. The hatred was there, yes, but it was swamped by something far more terrifying. Realization. She saw that I was not surprised. She saw the calm on my face. And in that instant, she understood. She hadn't been the playwright tonight. She had been the main character in a tragedy of her own making. And I had been the audience, watching it unfold exactly as the evidence had dictated it would. The chaos that erupted after they took her out was something out of a movie. Gasps, shouts, the scrape of chairs. My mother was sobbing, crumpled against my father, who stood rigid, pale, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes wide with a shock so deep it looked like physical pain. The gala was over. The spectacle was now the scandal. I didn't move. I let the storm swirl around me. A few people glanced at me, their expressions a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. The other sister. I ignored them. It was my grandfather, Pops, who found me. He'd been sitting at a far table with some old friends. At 82, he moved with a slow, deliberate grace. He came to my side, his hand gnarled with arthritis, resting gently on my shoulder. He didn't say a word. He just stood with me, a silent anchor in the wreckage. After a long moment, he leaned in close, his voice a low rasp only I could hear. The tree that doesn't bend breaks. She never learned to bend, just to hide the cracks with glitter. He squeezed my shoulder. You built with stone, Anya. Stone doesn't glitter, but it holds. Then he walked away, towards my devastated parents. That was Pops. He saw everything. He said almost nothing, but when he spoke, it held the weight of truth. I finally left, driving home through streets that seemed unnaturally quiet. The adrenaline was gone, leaving a hollow, echoing stillness inside me. There was no victory in this, only a vast, complicated wreckage. My sister was in custody, my parents were shattered, and the quiet, capable life I'd built was about to be pulled into the epicenter of a very public family meltdown. The silence in my apartment was absolute. I stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. The investigation into the foundation would be all anyone talked about tomorrow. Reporters would call, my company's name would be dragged into it simply by association. Leo's passive watch was about to become very, very active. The dam hadn't just broken, it had been vaporized. I knew what came next. The scrutiny, the legal proceedings, the slow, painful excavation of every financial record my sister had ever touched. The world was about to see the rot behind the glittering facade, and I was going to have a front row seat, not as the accused, but as a witness, the quiet sister who saw it coming. The question was, what would I do with that seat? Would I just watch, or would the woman who built her life on systems and integrity have to step into the chaos and help sort through the ruins? The game was over. The war, it seemed, was just beginning. And for the first time, I wasn't in the shadow. I was standing in the harsh, unforgiving light. And I had no idea who, in the aftermath, my family would see when they finally looked at me. The day the deal was finalized, I drove to my grandfather's house. He lived in a modest cottage on the edge of town, surrounded by oak trees. He was in his garden, slowly watering tomato plants. He saw me and nodded, turning off the hose. We sat on his porch swing, the only sound the creak of the chains and the distant birds. It's done, I said. I heard, he replied, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. Your mother is devastated. Your father is angry. At the system, at the lawyers, at the world. Not at her. never at her. I knew that. The anger was easier than the grief of admitting they'd built their pride on a fault line. "What do I do now, Pops?" I asked, the question slipping out. I hadn't meant to ask it. I was the one who was supposed to have it all figured out. He was silent for a long time, watching a robin hop across the lawn. "You remember when you were little and you'd build those elaborate block towers? Celia would knock them down to see them fall. You'd just build them again. Different each time. Stronger," I remembered. She never learned the joy of building, only the power of knocking things down. Now her tower's fallen. And you're still a builder, Anya. So build. His words sat with me for days. Build. But not just for myself. The Crestwood Foundation was dissolved, its assets seized to pay restitution. The physical building, a beautiful, historic property downtown, was put for sale. It was a white elephant, tainted by scandal. An idea, slow and quiet, began to form. It wasn't about redemption for her or for me. It was about utility, about taking something broken and making it useful again. The weeks that followed the gala were a slow-motion avalanche of shame and consequence. The story, of course, made the news. Philanthropist heiress arrested at own gala. Crestwood Foundation director faces fraud charges. My name was mentioned, always as a footnote, sister of the accused, but the narrative was clear. This was Celia's spectacular fall from grace. My parents' world became a fortress of quiet despair. My mother stopped calling. My father left one terse voicemail. "We need to focus on helping your sister right now." The message was clear. In the hierarchy of need, my untouched, scandal-free life didn't register. I was the stable one, which meant I was on my own. The old pattern, even in catastrophe, reasserted itself. She was the crisis, I was the background. I didn't fight it. I let them go. I had my own storm to navigate. Reporters camped outside my office building for 3 days. Leo handled them with a stony no comment that was more effective than any statement. Our clients, to their immense credit, mostly stood by us. A few got nervous and left. We let them go gracefully. Integrity, we learned, was a filter. It kept the people who valued it. The legal process was a grinding, impersonal machine. Celia's lawyers fought, of course. They tried to discredit the evidence, to argue misuse of funds was a matter of poor bookkeeping, not criminal intent. But the trail was too clear. The investigators her own money had hired had been so thorough in their mandate that when their attention was legally redirected, they found everything. Donations earmarked for youth programs funneled into shell companies for luxury travel. Inflated invoices for consulting fees paid to friends. The discretionary fund she'd used to investigate me was just the tip of a very ugly iceberg. Leo delivered the full picture to me in a sterile, bound report. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just laid it on my desk. "It's worse than we thought," was all he said. I read it alone in my office at night. The numbers were just numbers, but they told a story of breathtaking entitlement, of a person who believed the rules were a set design for a stage she stood above. I felt sick, not for her. For my grandmother's legacy was now a line item in a fraud indictment. For the community programs that had gone unfunded. For the trust that had been treated like a disposable prop. The climax wasn't another dramatic courtroom scene. It was a quiet, procedural meeting in a beige government office. Celia, advised by her lawyers, accepted a plea deal. Oversight, restitution, a 5-year ban from holding any fiduciary position in a nonprofit. It was a structured, unglamorous consequence. There would be no prison, but there would be a permanent scar on her reputation, a leash on her freedom, and a debt that would take years to repay. I used my own capital. I didn't ask for family permission. I bought the building. The real estate agent looked at me with pity and confusion. "You know the history, right?" "I do," I said. "Better than anyone." I renamed it the Cornerstone Center. I spent 6 months renovating. I stripped away the gilded trim, the opulent chandeliers. I made the space open, airy, full of light and sturdy tables. I installed state-of-the-art computer labs, funded scholarships, and partnered with local schools. We taught digital literacy, online safety, and cybersecurity basics to teenagers, especially kids from neighborhoods where a computer was a luxury and the internet was a minefield. We taught them how to protect their data, spot a scam, build a simple website, understand the code that ran their world. We gave them tools, not trophies. The first day the center opened, I stood in the back, watching a group of 15-year-olds intently following an instructor's lesson on encryption. Their faces were focused, alive with the same spark of understanding I'd felt in that school library so long ago. One girl finished a small project and pumped her fist with a quiet, "Yes!" It was the most meaningful sound I'd ever heard. This was building. This was stone holding. The change in my family was glacial. My mother began to call again, her voice hesitant. She'd ask about the weather, about my health. She didn't mention Celia. She didn't ask about the center. It was as if we were two survivors on separate rafts, slowly learning to wave across the distance. My father showed up at my office one day, unannounced. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, looking older. "The center," he said, clearing his throat. "I drove by it. It looks good." It was the closest he would come, for a long time, to saying he saw me. And Celia? Her transformation was the quietest and the most profound. The structure of her consequence forced her into a new life. Counseling, financial literacy classes, hundreds of hours of community service, real service, not photo ops. The spotlight was gone. The admirers vanished. She was just a woman with a record and a debt. For over a year, we had no contact. Then, one rainy Tuesday morning, an email arrived. "Anya, my restrictions are over next month. I would understand if you said no, but I would like to talk. No excuses, just talk. Minus C." I stared at it for an hour. The anger was a cold, dormant stone. The hurt was a faded scar. What I felt mostly was a deep, weary curiosity. Who was she now, without her armor? We met in a neutral cafe, one with no history for either of us. She arrived alone, without the shield of an entourage. She was thinner, her face bare of the flawless makeup she'd always worn. She looked ordinary, vulnerable. It was the most shocking thing I'd ever seen. She didn't try to perform. Her voice was quiet, stripped bare. She began, not meeting my eyes. "I hated you. I hated that you were content in your silence. I hated that you didn't need the room to turn toward you. I thought your life was small. I needed it to be small so mine could feel big." She spoke of the crushing pressure to be perfect, the terror of exposure, the hollow ache that no amount of praise ever filled. She described watching me walk away from that dinner years ago, not with concern, but with a searing envy. "You just walked away. You had something I never did." a self to go to. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She detailed the harm, specific and unflinching. The money diverted, the lies told to our parents, the investigators hired to break me. She whispered, "I wanted to prove you were a fraud, because I was living inside one, and I couldn't stand being the only one." I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, the silence was clean, like air after a storm. I said, "Thank you for telling me," and I meant it. I told her my side, not the facts of the investigation, but the feeling of a lifetime in her shadow, the constant gentle correction, the message that my world was less real. I said, "I built my company not to prove you wrong, but to prove to myself that my way of being in the world was valid." She heard me. She didn't defend or explain. She just nodded, tears finally spilling over. She said, "I see you now, Anya. I'm sorry it took this to make me look." We didn't hug. We didn't make grand promises. We paid the bill and walked out into the afternoon sun. It was a start, a foundation laid on the only thing left after everything else had burned away, the unadorned truth. That was 3 years ago. The story doesn't have a fairy tale ending. We're not best friends, but we are sisters, in a new and fragile way. We have coffee sometimes. We talk about our parents, about Pops's garden, about mundane things. The silent rivalry is gone, replaced by a cautious, hard-won respect. My parents eventually found their way to the Cornerstone Center. My mother now volunteers once a week, helping with administrative tasks. She does it quietly, without fanfare. My father, the engineer, sometimes comes by to check on the building's systems. He'll stand in the doorway of a lab, watch the kids working, and give me a small, solemn nod. It's his version of awe. Pops passed away last year, peaceful in his sleep under his oak trees. At the funeral, Celia and I stood side by side, not as rivals, not as victim and villain, just as two women who had loved the same gruff, wise old man. He'd seen the collapse, and he'd seen the rebuilding. I think he left us knowing the foundation, however cracked, was finally settling on solid ground. As for me, I still run my company. The Cornerstone Center is its own thriving entity. My life is full, but it's a different kind of full. It's not the loud, glittering fullness of acclaim. It's the deep, steady fullness of purpose. The quiet girl who spoke in code finally found her voice, and it wasn't used to shout down her sister. It was used to teach others how to speak in their own. The investigators who returned in handcuffs didn't expose me. They exposed a lie so big it had room for all of us to hide in. And in the wreckage of that lie, I found something I never expected. Not just my freedom, but my family. Broken, changed, and humbled, but real. We are no longer a performance. We are a work in progress, building something new from the stone of our mistakes. And for the first time, I'm not in the shadow. I'm right here, in the clear, honest light, building alongside them.